Let's chant and have a little meditation, and then I'd like to begin with the announcements tonight. I'd like to begin with the announcements tonight.
You sure?
Yeah.
Won't be everybody here.
Well,
I would wait. Together. Heavenly Father,
Heavenly Father,
Divine Mother,
Divine Mother,
Friend, Beloved God,
Friend, Beloved God,
Jesus Christ,
Jesus Christ,
Babaji Krishna,
Babaji Krishna,
Lahiri Mahashai,
Lahiri Mahashai,
Swami Sri Yukteswar,
Swami Sri Yukteswar,
Beloved Guru,
Beloved Guru,
Paramahansa Yoganandaji,
Paramahansa Yoganandaji,
and Sri Sri Patanjali,
and Sri Sri Patanjali.
we humbly bow before Thee.
We humbly bow before Thee.
Divine Mother,
Divine Mother,
open our minds to Your wisdom,
open our minds to Your wisdom,
and our hearts to Thy knowledge,
and our hearts to Thy knowledge,
our hands to Thy service.
our hands to Thy service.
Uplift us,
Uplift us,
inspire us,
inspire us,
teach us.
and teach us.
Om. Peace.
Peace.
Amen. We're going to meditate? Yeah. Let's just have a few minutes of meditation. Close the doors of the temple, remove the shoes of activities and preoccupations, worldly involvements. Sitting upright, shoulders relaxed, chest up, with strength and courage. The openness to receive truth and wisdom, to be changed and transformed. With courage and with joy, open then the door of the heart. Be not afraid. Let the light of wisdom enter, the unconditional love of God. Purify and cleanse all restlessness. And when the heart is secure and calm, resting in the self, lift the heart's natural love up into the light that shall make us free. Let's meditate briefly. you decide on the announcements.
Back here we have the board for Thanksgiving. If you'd like to sign up for Thanksgiving, it's here and available for you. And throughout the board again, we didn't get much time with the last time. This is her class for Swami and Nandi. She's coming and doing a class on karma on a Saturday, November 23rd. So if you want to, I don't know, just send this around. There's a pen on the board. And then on this side is the Friday night class at East West. So just send it around and tell people.
Yeah, we did it at the end last time, and as a result, it didn't get to everybody. So, Jamal, pass it on. You already signed it.
And as part of Thanksgiving, we're going to do thank you notes this year, gratitude notes to people in the Sangha. So they're downstairs at the front desk, and we also have some at the community. And we've done these before, so I think many of you know about them. And you just write out to people, and then we're going to hopefully file them a little bit ahead of time before the banquet. So there's files both downstairs and at the community to get started on the gratitude notes to your friends and Sangha.
And then last but not least, can you all hear me? Am I on? I don't feel like it. Oops. My ear fell off.
Your ear fell off.
So, you all remember last year when we had our Sadhaka Christmas party in Hansa, and each of the groups took turns putting on some kind of little mini performance, skits, either fun, serious, inspiring, whatever you decide, and we had a good time. So that time is coming up again. It's only about 3 weeks away in December, and in fact I don't have the date memorized, but it's somewhere in the middle of December, and I will email you the date. And we've been meeting as one group, but originally we were going to divide into small groups, so I had you all sort of divvied up already. And what I'll be doing is, I think I will just simply email to you the different groupings, and then next week, when we have our final meeting, it's not about Patanjali, although we might do a little recap, but it's about coming together at the end of the year and talking about things that are current and relevant to all of us spiritually. And we're going to leave a segment of that time for you to break up into those groups and begin coordinating and talking with one another. And so the reason I'm bringing it up this week is so that you can start thinking about fun ideas for a little Christmas presentation in your mini groups. It can be musical, it can be from various parts of the teachings. It can be, you can be Patanjali, you can discourse on Patanjali, you can decide what you would like to do as a group that way. So just a heads up, and an email will be going out about that, and you'll see who all is in your group and so forth. Okay. Vibhuti.
We're going to try to recap books 3 and 4 tonight. And Morley, the comment you made, is it relevant to book 4?
Yes, it's 4.
Okay, well, don't let me forget to have you do that before we do book 4. Okay. So book 3, Vibhuti Pada. Vibhuti, most of us see as a word that means sacred ash, like the ash that we used for Kriya, for example, Saturday night. But Vibhuti also has the meaning of siddhis, the powers. And Swami calls the book, in his own term, the accomplishments. So much of the book 3, Vibhuti Pada, deals with the siddhis, the powers that appear. So other than reading them and getting a good chuckle or being puzzled, by them. We're going to cover some of the early part of the chapter. It's curious that in listing the Eightfold Path, Patanjali listed the first 5 stages, didn't he, at the end of Book 2, which we finished last week. But the 3 upper stages, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi, he reserves for Vibhuti-pada. And I don't really know his reasons, but inasmuch as it's the Vibhuti, that which remains, one would have to say, as he implied, that the 3 final stages of the Eightfold Path are more subtle and internal than the first stages. Think, for example, of yama niyama being somewhat behavioral oriented, at least from a superficial point of view, whereas these 3 are very hard to make an analogy to daily life in dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. He starts off, though, of course, with dharana, and pointing out the importance of concentration. Nobody would argue with concentration with that point, rather, but he makes what is a more interesting point, I think, which is he talks about success in business. He talks about rajasi. He talks about how concentration is the key ingredient for success in all things. And as he seems to do in this book, he kind of shortchanges himself once again, saying that his aesthetic interests and artistic interests were as if somehow lesser. And I take exception to that, as I did on other things where he sort of put himself down a bit, because concentration, thought of in a perhaps superficial way, but thought of as willpower, which is certainly the prerequisite to concentration, willpower without sensitivity is like a bull in a china closet. For example, think of meditative concentration. If you were to stare at a photo of the masters, for example, what would you get from it without sensitive inner awareness and feeling? And so I take exception to his statements in that sense. It's presumed but not stated that concentration requires its companion of awareness. That's the word Swami has used in his other writings on concentration with awareness, willpower with awareness, willpower with sensitivity, magnetism, and so forth. So it's there, but I feel it right to make that point. The other thing he says that I can't recall him quite linking together, but Patanjali does, which is the link between concentration and intuition. In fact, his comments about feeling right at the end of that, when he speaks of women as being more feeling, is where he gives away the necessity for there to be sensitivity, as I just said. But we don't normally think of concentration as a prerequisite for intuition, but we need to understand, the very first book of Patanjali was called Samadhi. I mean, among other things, he starts with Samadhi. I mean, that's part of the challenges we have in studying Patanjali, is it's a little beyond our usual day-to-day experience. But in any case, that concentration leads to dhyana, absorption. And so it gives away, again, that finer, more sensitive aspect of feeling that draws intuition. Swamiji, mentions then the 8 aspects of God. And there are some potential questions that can arise from this. I'll let others find them rather than bring them up. But well, anyway, I'm just going to put that little seed out there and you can figure it out. So he does talk about the 8 aspects of God in superconsciousness in which we can focus on. He doesn't mention focusing on the Guru and any number of other so-called objects of concentration and devotion, but they are included in any case. So, Morley, can you read for us verses 1 through 3?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'll read them all together. Let's sit up straight as if we're about to meditate. Am I on? Okay. Deshabandhaha Chittasya Dharana Tatra Pratyaya Ekatanata Dhyanam Tadevarthamatram Nirbhasam Swarupa Shunyamiva Samadhihi. Dharana is concentration, fixing one's full attention on one place, object or idea at a time. Dhyana, meditation, is concentration on higher aspects of reality. When the subject, the person meditating, and the object of his meditation, God, become one, it is samadhi. Dharana is concentration, fixing one's full attention on one place, object or idea at a time. Dhyana, meditation, is concentration on higher aspects of reality. When the subject, the person meditating, and the object of his meditation, God, become one, it is samadhi.
So dharana is that state by which we perceive certain subtle things. I think most of us in this room, having meditated, not so much on the basis of years, but having been drawn to the path of meditation, have certainly had some inner experiences, different sounds perhaps, jyoti, light, even the spiritual eye, I think many of us, certainly feelings of peace and other aspects of the 8 aspects. And so perceptions of these things come to the various beginner meditator. But dharana is that stage where we perceive, I'll call it Om. We hear Om, but we're able to hear Om consistently. We're able to listen to Om with steady concentration. I don't know that the length of time was ever defined so much, but it's something that occurs, let's say, with some consistency and a concentration ability that holds steady in the mind's eye or ear or feeling one of these 8 aspects of higher consciousness. In dhyana, that's when it starts getting murky, or it actually gets clearer, but murky to describe, because in dhyana, if you're feeling wonderful upliftment and peace, for example, let's just say in dharana, the sense of I feeling peaceful remains also steady. I am hearing Om. Oh, or maybe that's the 3rd chakra. So the I principle is always present in dharana. But when our absorption in the experience becomes deeper and deeper, the sense of separateness, I, begins to dissolve. Beyond that, then, it's virtually impossible, and is technically, intellectually, academically impossible to go beyond that realm. Because the I hasn't been snuffed out. It's not as if you get absorbed into inner peace and you come out of it and wonder where the heck you were. I often tell students in meditation, if you don't know where you went, you didn't go there, meaning into superconsciousness. So you're more dynamically aware, but with words, you just can't go past a certain point of actual experience. That sense of separateness, it's simply peace. Okay. The intellectual challenge, and that's all it is, has to do with samadhi. Because if I'm one with peace or Om, why isn't that samadhi? Well, he doesn't say any such thing here in this book at all. It's as clinical as Patanjali is for the most part. But in his other writings and so forth, some of the distinctions I recall Swamiji making, in case these things occur to you also, is that the states of superconsciousness are essentially experienced in the three bodies, if you will. And here I don't want to split hairs, but for example, listening to Om is obviously, most of the 8 aspects are obviously astral if you give them just a little bit of thought. So in the astral body, we'll just say, you experience Om. But you're still very much contained in the bottles of the three bodies, one way or the other. Whereas in Samadhi, we can say with fair amount of confidence, having studied these teachings, that Samadhi goes beyond the vibratory spheres of the three vibratory spheres. So that much we can say. Whatever spectrum of movement or experience takes place one between the other is, well, I guess we'll know when we know. But all three of them together then constitute what Patanjali, and I'm not aware of any other scriptures that use the term, but I bet there are, he uses the term samyama. And Murli looked it up for me, and then I looked it up too. Samyama, well, yama, control, right? Sam, I don't know who Sam is. Samadhi, okay. So Samadhi, Sam, same, yama. Basically, control. And so in samyama, we move through a progression of consciousness, upliftment of consciousness, first in contemplation or meditation upon. Swami just goes ballistic over the term object, as if God were some object. But anyway, you've read the text, so I'm not going to belabor the point. So you contemplate, meditate in dharana upon an object, you become absorbed in that, and then you go beyond it. And so this process of samyama, which we'll just touch on quickly here in a minute, is the process, the subtle process by which we experience and enter the realm of intuition. Based on concentration, yes, but true intuition, as George Washington Carver said about plants, and the other fellow, Burbank too, has to do with the degree to which we commune with it. And only to the degree that we feel empathy and sympathy and closeness or whatever with another person or an animal or even an algorithm, if that's our work, can we draw from it, as it were, distill from it its message, its meaning. And so Patanjali, being as clinically as he is, though he drives Swami nuts, the reality is also true. Patanjali talks about objects of contemplation which are gross and subtle. You can apply samyama to your work, for example. You can apply it to relationship. Those would be, quote, to use his clinical term, gross objects. You can get to understand a person through this process of focusing with awareness and sympathy or sensitivity. Sympathy sounds sort of the wrong thing, but empathy or something, feeling, and so on in this way. That's why in samyama you can meditate on the moon and the sun and the stars and and get all these outrageous insights into astronomy and health and healing and so forth by virtue of this merging of consciousness in which the object of contemplation reveals to you its essence, its vital essence. So in this way, this process, however esoteric on its own merits, can be made practical in daily life. He says that in these ways that I've just described, we're talking about samyama, including samadhi in this sense, as being with seed, meaning that you're distilling this essence from something or other, subtle, gross objects, or in the case of sabhikalpa samadhi, there remains as an object that retained sense of separateness, of ego. And Swami uses a very fascinating, sort of like an inverted triangle. He says that if out of sabhikalpa samadhi you realize the littleness of the self, of the ego, then you can continue and expand towards freedom. But if the other end of the telescope is looked through and Sabikalpa Samadhi enlarges your sense of, wow, aren't I cool, then of course that's how one falls spiritually. He's never said it, but my best guess is that everybody who reaches Sabikalpa Samadhi falls. I don't personally see how it could be otherwise. It's probably too mind-blowing. I doubt it's a straight line. But anyway, that's just my opinion on it. Okay, but without seed, nirvikalpa, then all of the residuary aspects of identification with the body and ego have been dissolved. But not, of course, the past aspects of our karma. And I think Padma's going to talk about the Jivan Mukta in Book 4, about some very strange and curious things about the resolution of those past seeds in one who is completely free. Let me check my notes. Is it time to read 3? Let's read 3.8.
Tadapi bahirangam nirbijasya. Even these three, dharana, dhyana and samadhi, are external to the seedless samadhi. Even these three, dharana, dhyana and samadhi, are external to the seedless samadhi.
Oh, there it is. So Patanjali gives sort of 4 stages, basically, in which we go through this progression to the seedless state of samadhi, where the vrittis become smooth and our awareness steady. That's essentially dharana. And there's a steady upward flow of our consciousness. Then the distractions begin to dwindle. We become more and more identified by repeated forays into the superconscious state of samadhi. We become more and more identified with that state as our reality. And then finally the waves of past and present vrittis, karma, etc. subside into deep calmness. At that point, the changeless essence appears, and like that example that Master gives, that comes from India probably generally, which is all the little pots of water in the moonlight above the pots become still and perfectly reflect the moon. One thing that he ends with in this section, Patanjali rather, in one of the verses, he points out that it is change that stimulates our evolution in consciousness. Even though it's change and the transcendence of vrittis and change that is the goal of our existence and the freedom. But think of it this way, through suffering people question and want to be free. So it's through that. And then Swami talks about Darwin and various other things, but I don't think we need to go in that. So what I'd like to do is just very briefly, before turning it over to Padma in Book 4, I wanted to point out some of the curious, there are just many, many samyamas that go on. For example, by samyama on a word, any word, its significance and feeling is revealed. By samyama on our physical body and its aura, we can achieve the siddhi of becoming invisible. Very practical. A yogi can know the time of death, for example. And by concentration, meditation, etc., samyama on friendliness and on strength. And he used the example, he actually uses the word elephant in the stanza. One can achieve the characteristic of friendliness and physical strength. Upon the moon and the stars, knowledge about astronomy. Upon the throat, overcoming hunger. In my early days of teaching Raja, when I was unaccustomed to not having dinner, I used this long ago. I would concentrate, meditate before class, and meditate in the center of the throat, and I found it was very efficacious, and I've done that during travel too. We could sell that as a dietary prescription. What do you think? Lose weight. Focusing on the thyroid, something I haven't tried, to stimulate, sort of a funny word, stimulate motionlessness in meditation. Then he points out that purity is probably the most important thing of all. Meditating on one's own heart and the vrittis therein will reveal to ourselves self-understanding. It's a very interesting way to do it. Then, of course, verse 38, he warns that after giving all these outrageous cities, that they're obstacles. But why does he do that? Because they're going to come anyway. He's warning us that as we grow spiritually, Swami has pointed out many times over the years that whereas human egoic pride is brittle because of the law of duality, you think you're good, well, there's always somebody better. Spiritual pride is not so brittle. It's real, and therefore is more difficult to overcome. So, and then he talks about, I didn't bother to list them, levitation, astral travel, using the astral senses in place of physical senses, even how to have physical beauty and physical health. Then he says, however, non-attachment to these cities gives the supreme power. So, one that I found quite interesting, it's a mindfulness technique, which is to be totally present of sequential movements, moment to moment, as a way of developing, he calls it discrimination, but let's just call it intuition, call it what it is. By being totally, completely present in a feeling and aware way, we develop intuition, moment to moment. Okay, and finally he says, this is really an issue I've had all my life. Beware, he says, from pride, from contact with celestial beings. So, okay, Padma.
Is that the one where Swami...
I'm surrounded by celestial beings. I mean...
Is that the one where he talks about the vision he had of the green face?
Yeah, yeah.
I love that. So, I get to talk about Kaivalya Pada. Can you pronounce it for me?
Kaivalya Pada.
Kaivalya Pada.
And I was going to ask Morley to share an insight he had about Book 4 with us. Go ahead.
So Book 4 has a lot of really intense Sanskrit. And in the translations I have read, they've all been translated somewhat literally, and it makes it very awkward to get anything spiritual out of it. And there are so many that Swami just made it so simple. So, that's what he really means. So there is one that I particularly wanted to point out, which I thought, wow, I wish I had seen that before. So on 33, it's the penultimate one. And if you translate the Sanskrit more or less literally, it says, an uninterrupted succession of moments which can be recognized at the end of their transformations. That's what the Sanskrit's saying. And Swami says, time itself ceases to exist. Uninterrupted succession of moments which can be recognized at the end of their transformations. Time itself ceases to exist. There are several such things that I came across. It's there all through the book, but in Pada number 4, it's very obvious.
Simplicity is his hallmark. And a deep understanding of... I love it, the fact that he can call on the translators of Patanjali and say, guys are really messing up. This is not what Patanjali could possibly have said. And here's why. You know, I mean, I can't even understand what the thing said to begin with, what to speak of. Understand that somebody must have made a translation error, as they did in the Bible as well. So, on absoluteness, which is what this one is about, I thought it was really nice that it tied in so well to the Kriya Saturday night. I'm really not doing well here.
You're good.
Okay. Where I talked about the fact that Swami used to quote Master saying often, and in the Kriyas especially, you should hope to become a Jivan Mukta in this lifetime. And so Patanjali takes us there, and he explains to us what that means. The Jivan Mukta has experienced Nirvikalpa Samadhi, which means we're not completely free yet. There is still past karma that we need to expiate, but we are free from ego. And so we're in that highest state of freedom, and all we need to still do is go back through our past actions to transcend those. In other words, to see that it was God acting in those karmas and not our egoic self. We already know that in the current experience, and we need to go back to those past experiences to let them go and to release them. I remember one year, long time ago, maybe 30 years ago, Rima and I were at Disneyland with Swami. And we were I'll never forget it, we were in the Pirates of the Caribbean ride. You know that one? And there's a little restaurant there, the Bayou Restaurant or something. And there's all these stars. They have this dark kind of sky with stars in it. And you're sitting in this surreal, fanciful kind of place. And Swami starts talking about the Jivan Mukta and releasing those past karmas, and how you can do it in vision and in dream and in meditation, and how you can do it, you can work through several lifetimes at a time, several egos at the same time of your past incarnations. And in this way you can release many lifetimes of karma in a single meditation. And he's talking that way under the stars at Disneyland in the Pirates of the Caribbean ride. I remember he also talked that same night, I'll never forget it, it was like being, it was like being in the astral, really. Yeah. He was talking about how the more through time and on different planets we live as beings with higher consciousness, the greater our awareness and consciousness, the sort of longer our bodies become, to where there's some parts of the cosmos where, the seeming body, presumably the astral body, is as tall as from here to the moon or something, just very, very elongated. And I mean, it was like going through the Sri Yukteswar's chapter on the resurrection of Sri Yukteswar in the autobiography of a yogi, right there with the Pirates of the Caribbean. It was the most amazing experience. Anyway, with this Jivan Mukta state of consciousness, Master is saying, if we apply ourselves, this is what we should be able to experience. If we meditate steadily and do our practices and attune ourselves to God and Guru, freedom in this lifetime. By the time we desire God And by the time we sincerely put one foot in front of the other to actually dedicate our lives to that divine experience, we have it already, but we just need to actually apply ourselves to it, and we can experience it in this lifetime. So in that state, we become the observer. I think it's no accident that in Hong Sa, in the Om technique, in these techniques we practice being the observer. We practice not controlling the breath, simply watching it. We practice not creating the sound, simply listening to whatever sound we hear, being the observer, being the listener, being the transparent, non-ego. So, let's see. Then he describes, and this gets a little esoteric, gives that example of, let's say that in a past life, and mind you, we've done probably everything, good and bad, in past lives. And he said, let's say that, imagine that in a past life you started a forest fire. And as a Jivan Mukta, you're reviewing all your past karmas, all your past lives, and you come upon that incident. What can happen is that you can be freed, that karma can be neutralized in terms of your own spiritual freedom. But the fact that that forest fire happened and it affected other people, that can never be changed. That we don't go back and undo history and remake it like they try to do in some science fiction movies.
Like Back to the Future.
Yeah. The fact that it happened, that's always there, and it was a negative act. But our awareness of it and attachment to it and recognition that God is the doer, and we were not egoically present any longer in that action. That's the aspect of freedom that we can have. But it's a very, very delicate thing to understand, and I just wanted to highlight that. Worley, you were going to read, actually, for me, 4 through 6.
He must have forgot.
I didn't ask him. Thank you. Could you?
Okay. This is 3 verses, so I'll read them one after the other. Nirmana chittani asmita matrat pravritti bhede prayojakam chittam ekam anekesham tatra dhyanajam anashanam. Once a great yogi has attained nirvikalpa samadhi, his enlightened consciousness can produce in visions several of his past memories together. Although the actions of those many bodies may differ wildly, his original chitta or primordial feeling remains the same. Although in those meditations he perceives many personalities, he himself remains untouched by any latent impression of past karma from those lives and by any past craving and attachment. Once a great yogi has attained Nirvikalpa Samadhi, his enlightened consciousness can produce in visions several of his past memories together. Although the actions of those many bodies may differ wildly, his original chitta or primordial feeling remains the same. Although in those meditations he perceives many personalities, he himself remains untouched by any latent impression of past karma from those lives and by any past craving and attachment.
Imagine how peaceful that state can be, and it can be ours. Okay, so catching up now, can you take us to 412?
Atita anagatam swarupataha asti advabhedan dharmanam. Past and future exist not only subjectively but objectively because of the countless differences among the beings involved. Past and future exist not only subjectively but objectively because of the countless differences among the beings involved.
So this was the section then, this is where Swami explained it as the fact that you can't go back and change the fact that you started that forest fire and that people were killed or hurt. That karmic act doesn't change, but your relationship to it, that is to say, your ability to see God as the doer, to see it as part of the great movie of life and not be no longer attached to it, can give you the freedom from it. Let's go to 422 then.
Chittehe apratisanga kramayaha tadakara apattau swabuddhi samvedanam. The consciousness of the self never changes, but when its reflection appears in the mind is illuminated with individual intelligence. The consciousness of the self never changes, but when its reflection appears in the mind is illuminated with individual intelligence.
This is the one then that Riemann was referring to, It actually comes here in 422 about the image of the pots of water and the moon reflected in it. And it struck me that in Essence of Self-Realization, Swami quotes this same story, analogy that Master gives of the moon is up here and the pots of water are down below, and all of them are reflecting that same moon in the pots. And so that's from the perspective of the moon being the same, regardless of where the reflection is. But in this, to me, this one is from the perspective of the filter. So here he's talking about, in Patanjali, he's talking about the fact that we all filter that divinity a little differently, depending on if there's wind going over the pot of our water, or if our pot is fat and big, or if it's small and narrow, different, sizes and shapes. So it's talking about the filtering God through each individual being. The reflection will look a little different from the perspective of the individuals, but that oneness is the same. And I wanted to, then he goes into 427 and 8, which we're not going to read, but he's talking about the distractions and not getting caught up in the little fillers of life. And then he lists all our favorite fillers, like movies and games and sports and all those kinds of things that we tend to like to fill our lives with, reading gobs and gobs of books. And it's a hard one. Swami would often talk about, use the illustration of Yogananda sort of not scolding, but calling the monks on the fact that they were playing too much chess and what a waste of time that was. They should be meditating. And that gives us a hint as to, the level of dedication and focus that we have to have, that we, if we were living in his ashram, could we take it? Could we take it that instead of playing chess, we should be playing meditation. We should be meditating. And so, he himself would show us in his own life, we'd all work hard to put on a big event, and then, he would host us all over to watch an inspiring movie or something to just sort of relax. So it's not the extreme. That is to say, we have to find our balance. We have to recognize that we need certain outlets. And let's at least try to find uplifting outlets or things that don't become addictive. Let's be moderate in our outlets in those ways. But still recognize and be willing to be self-honest enough and recognize that they are outlets, and that eventually we're going to not want to do them anymore because we'll be so much in bliss all the time. And he also says, and I want to read the explanation a moment, because I found it, or was it the explanation? I think it was. It was a short one about 428. It says distractions can be removed, as has been discussed before, but above all, by meditation and resolving the mind back to its source. And I thought that was interestingly put, because of course we understand that we can by practicing meditation and the concentration, dhyana that comes from meditation, in meditation, we are transcending distractions. But he's also talking about resolving the mind back to its source. And to my mind, what that means, it's my interpretation, is that everything that happens to us to be having that inner conversation with God and to refer everything back to God in our day-to-day interactions and activities. And if we keep referring back to the source, to the God within, then eventually we're focusing on God, and we're no longer affected by the distractions. We begin to become more concentrated even within our activity. Can you read 32 through 34?
Tatah krutarthanam parinama krama samaptihi gunanam. Kshanapratyogi parinama aparanta nigrahya kramaha purushartha shunyanam gunanam pratiprasavaha kaivalyam swarupa pratishtava chitta shaktehe iti. At this point, the gunas cease to serve their purpose. They have been transcended. The sequence of transformations end, and with that ending, time itself ceases to exist. Thus, one attains the supreme state of freedom when the gunas reabsorb themselves into Prakriti, having no more purpose for serving the Purusha. Or, to put it differently, the power of consciousness withdraws into its own nature.
Ah, bliss. So the gunas being the reflections of the sort of measure of the wave, whether it's close to the bosom of the ocean or far away from the bosom of the ocean. In that sense, once it's merged back into the ocean, there's no longer the gunas. So in the oneness with infinity, in the oneness with God, there is no longer that spectrum of that measurement of our distance from God, because we are now one with God. Beyond all the three gunas, trigunarahitam. I love that. We sing that often in that chant, and it's wonderful to have a deeper understanding of the meaning of that. So that's where we are. We're merged into divine consciousness. That's where Patanjali leaves us. Riemann, you want to wrap it up?
Oh, you have it. Well, Patanjali is not easy to digest, for sure. Some of the thoughts that came to me trying to reflect back is, it is a scripture of true yoga in the sense of that complete absorption, that oneness, which is to say, and as Padma pointed out weeks ago, it's not, for example, like the Bible or the Gita, it's not so much a guide to human behavior, ethical behavior, moral behavior, and that kind of thing. It really is a treatise or a revelation or a summary of changes in chitta, changes in consciousness from the low to the high. And so sure, all scriptures come from revelation, from a high state, of course, but this is focused on the final stages of that. And so as I said earlier tonight, it even begins with samadhi. I mean, book 1, pada 1, is samadhi pada. And although I, from the standpoint of Yogananda's use of the term samadhi, Patanjali takes some liberties with it, interpreting it all the way from, quote, mere concentration to final kavalya. Nonetheless, it starts at a very high state relative to where most of us are, both in consciousness and in meditation. Master lectured on the sutras, but he himself didn't write a commentary. Why was that? I don't have an answer for that, but I find it interesting. Those of us who have the transcriptions of his lectures find that the lectures do everything but talk about Patanjali. They talk about all sorts of fun things, but very little about the sutras themselves. And Swami wrote this in the final year of his life, when he, like Master, and I think like a lot of souls, not necessarily advanced souls even, but I think in the end of life, some people at least, are more reflective and are beginning to detach, if they have any kind of wisdom at all, on whatever level. And so that sort of jnanic phase of the last years of one's life, or the last year of life, is when Swami turned his mind to something that I'll go out on a limb and say was, I think you can feel, I certainly can, that this was not his home turf. This clinical analysis of consciousness, he, I think, like Ramakrishna's great disciple, Vivekananda, Swami came to earth to do Master's work. And as it related to meditation and high meditative experiences, although he was very quiet about those kinds of things, for the most part, that wasn't why he came. Kriyananda meant kriya in the sense of action, not only in the sense of meditation. And so this was not, for the most part, not familiar, I don't want to say familiar, but this was not his home turf for Swami. And so in this jnanic sort of phase, he distilled from the sutras that vital essence that Master had conveyed to him in that jnanic sense. But it is, and I will hold to it, a scripture for Treta Yuga, but it does so as showing us what lies, in a very bad pun on the screen, lies ahead, meaning in our head and ahead on the spiritual path. It's dry, it's clinical, it's completely jnanic. It is the power of the mind. There's hardly an ounce, there's no service, and there's even less devotion in this. Because he's simply describing the movements of chitta. That's what it's all about. Yogas chitta vritti nirod. From the internal perspective of the higher mind, for which service and devotion are but stepping stones to oneness. In oneness, there's no service. In oneness, there's no devotion. It goes beyond triguna rahitam. It goes beyond the qualities in that sense. It's completely devoid of Sankhya. Again, Sankhya includes things like ethics and morals and cosmology and so forth. It's completely, there's no cosmology in Patanjali. It's completely, I'll use a term tentatively, subjective, meaning of the mind in this sense and what the mind experiences. On the other hand, there are aspects of these things that we can distill according to our own nature. Not much in the way of bhakti, but those of you who are bhakti need to remember, and those of you who are serviceful need to remember, and those of you who are focused on your meditation techniques need to remember that all of that willpower, all of that outpouring of bhakti or service or concentration is still only an outpouring from the ego. You can love God all you want. You can focus on Master all you want. But until you dissolve that and begin to receive the grace of Master's love, to receive the grace of his wisdom, to receive the grace of that spiritual power, you're not there yet. You're just playing. You're practicing. So whether it's bhakti, karma, or jnana in the sense of self-discipline and mental concentration, those are not superconsciousness. Those are, and far cry even, therefore, from samadhi. We need to let go of the doing and enter the being. In meditation, we should aspire towards going, as long as you're thinking in meditation, you're definitely not even close to superconsciousness. You might feel peaceful, great. But we need, as Kriya Yogis especially, we need to have every meditation move from doing to being. Have some sense by which we dissolve that I aspect and receive and enter into whatever it is, prana, love, all those things. And that's what Patanjali is talking about. And Patanjali will make more sense to you to the degree you really try to do that. And it can be done in daily activity. You can feel that sense. I mean, what I got from Patanjali were many things in this study, and I found a lot of inspiration, and it wasn't in most of those words. It was in the intuitive conveying, if you will, of the states to which he was attempting to describe. And that's and for example, one of the ways he did it, Padma mentioned it last week when you had us do the meditation. I don't remember what meditation that was exactly, but it was really important. But it goes like this. Basically, if you read metaphysical meditations, if you read the Yogoda lessons, if you read Master's original writings, you see a consistent theme about feeling space, expanding your consciousness in a feeling sense, in a spatial sense. And that's a very powerful image, and you can do that driving down the road to a certain extent. If you're driving the car, you can certainly do it during various activities, is that sense of samadhi. I'll stretch a point here, but that sense of connection that we can feel right here, sitting here together. That dissolving of our differences, that sense of beingness is always present with us. And that's how we move, you might say, towards Treta. That's how we move towards the real phase of the last three, Treta 3, Samyama, those last three stages, is to go beyond the doing of the first 5 limbs of yoga into that being. So I admit it's been a bit of a head trip on this, but I know many of you have commented to this extent that you have found some inspiration in any case from this fellow Patanjali, for whom we don't even have a photograph. We don't know his last name. We don't know where he lived, but we know him well. Okay, so let's open it up. Morley, you'll repeat stuff, and I did send out a couple of list of questions, so let's start with the Honorable Mr. Clark.
More of an observation, I think. When Padma was talking about, I forget exactly from where, but it's when you do an act and whatever you did, the karma is going to allow it to remain there. You can remove your karma from it, but something is still there to have some impact. It reminded me of a passage in the Rudyat. It's pretty well known secularly. It goes like, the moving finger writes and having read moves on, nor all your piety nor wit shall work back to cancel half a line, nor shall all your tears wash out of it. Wash it out. It's always been my observation that there's so many persons, people from different time, different culture, different space, whatever, saying the same thing. And we see it in great concentration here, but we've all seen it through things we read, usually spiritual stuff, but you can find the same thing in a lot of just, like the Lord of the Rings. I found things in there that went in the same direction. So you know, observation.
It's true, because, I mean, Master said, for instance, of course, that Omar Khayyam was enlightened, an enlightened soul. And so when you experience that enlightenment, it is all the same. And it's going to be the same in every culture, because enlightenment remains the same.
So Back to the Future isn't really true? You can't go back and fix things?
No. But that wasn't John's point.
Well, in Star Trek they did that.
Yeah. Somebody can do it. In Hollywood they can do it. Any others?
Masha.
It strikes me that we talk about becoming one with God, but aren't we already one with God? I mean, we can't avoid that.
Speak for yourself.
Is it? Well, we're talking about, what we really should be saying is realizing that. Isn't that true?
Our awareness that we are one with God.
We can't avoid being one with God.
Right.
That's right.
That's all there is. And then that brought me to the thought about when Swami speaks of thinking of yourself as being in space, and what Padma, you were saying about observing, that helps to take us out of here. You know, if I'm not observing, if I'm out there, if I'm a part of everything observing. It center everywhere, circumference nowhere. Yeah. And it's all about making that one tiny little switch in how you perceive. It seems so simple, you know, on the one hand. Just that little switch of perception and you're there, but it's so hard to do.
I can't point to things like samadhi, but I can say that after many years of meditating, you begin to, in more parts of your life, you live it in sort of a bird's eye view. You know, you get a broader perspective. You have a little more distance from it. Like the samadhi poem that's around us every time we come into this sanctuary, reminding us of that greater perspective. I'm sure many of you experience that too.
Mr. Andrew, the man from Ireland.
So, talking about the thoughts of water, how the self never changes, but the reflections of the self, the thoughts of water are all different, and that's how our individuality comes out. So it kind of implies when we merge back into the self, we lose our individuality. But I think Yogananda says that we never lose an individuality. Can you speak to that?
Padma, you want to address that? Absolutely.
You want me to repeat
he
it?
in fact uses this example in this context here to say exactly that. Let me see if I can find it again. Oh, you want to repeat the question,
Yeah.
Morley?
Me? Oh.
No, Morley.
Morley, yeah. I never heard the question.
So, so the question was, when the individual merges with the self, does it imply a loss of individuality, as opposed to the metaphor of moon being reflected in the pot, where individuality seems to be retained, as Padma mentioned, due to the different shapes of the pot and so forth?
But when we merge back, we're supposed to lose our individuality.
Do we lose it?
But Yogananda says we don't, that we retain it somehow.
Right. Padma's going to explain that just a second.
Well, he does explain it in here. But actually this pot example doesn't exactly explain what Andrew is saying. But he does talk about the fact that when we merge, he uses some of the Patanjali verses in this last section to talk about the fact that when we merge back into God, we still retain that individuality, in the sense that if somebody calls to us from another age or time, we will, we call on Jesus, he'll still appear to the disciple as Jesus. We call on Yogananda or Buddha or Krishna, and he will still appear to us in that form. So they remain, they keep that essence, but it is part of the greater essence.
There's three aspects to that. There's one in the cosmic mind, in infinity. There is no past, present, or future. So all the incarnations in which you were schmuck, so to speak, not you personally, of course, that we were in ego consciousness, are as present in infinity now as they were then. So the base level is that all that ever was is, period. Then there's the next level in which we, we'll call it in time and space, merge into infinity, and sort of like a cutoff point. What happens then? Well, there's two more aspects to that. One is that, and this Swami himself has never really expounded upon, but he says even our soul, quite apart from our ego, from its beginnings in eternity to its end in infinity, is, as every snowflake, a unique expression of divinity. Not talking about samskars, vrittis, past, but in some way that he cannot probably define because it's undefinable, remains unique. And then there's finally the aspect that is actually mentioned in the book where because to be free requires you to free at least 6 other people, therefore you would have disciples upon merging into God. Therefore, if a, let's say, disciple were to call upon you in some time and space in the future, we'll say, you might appear, as Jesus appeared to St. Francis, long gone, you can appear to them in that bodily form, calling on not just the spiritual uniqueness, but the actual, life of Jesus Christ as Jesus Christ uniqueness in the past. So there's several levels to it. But it does kind of resolve that long-standing dual versus non-dual debate through the Kali Yuga that took place in India especially. As, the Christians just decided that the ego remains forever. They just resolved it that way. There's no dissolution. You just strum harps for eternity. But in India, which was a much more sophisticated tradition, the debate raged as to whether merging with God was a dissolution of one's separateness or not. And effectively, so far as I know, Master resolved that in a way that I've never come across in any other Indian teacher, period, bar none. But I'm not a scholar. So.
There's that nice passage in Samadhi where he's observing the little ego floating in me, and it's just that image of, it's there, but it's not really, doesn't seem important anymore. I mean, we put a lot of importance to that aspect, but it's there, but it's...
I think whatever it is a reassurance that unlike the connotation implied by nothingness or nirvana, it's a reassurance that there's nothing lost in God. It could only be that, for all I can say, or I would know. It's a comforting thought that, there's no destruction implied in union with God. What else? Servaj.
I think you might have just answered this question, but I'm still a little confused. It seems in some of the material tonight, they said at some point that time no longer exists. But then in another point in the material, it said the past and future are always with us. So I was a little confused by that, because if time doesn't exist, then wouldn't past and future no longer exist?
Oh, I guess not.
I'm going to let you answer that one.
So, Morley, repeat the question, please.
Just say when I should be done repeating.
You repeat long enough, the system will go away.
So the question was...
I think the time's up.
The question was that there was at least one passage which said time ceases to exist. And there was at least another passage and more which specifically said that the past and the future will continue to exist, and talked about subjective and objective and all kinds of stuff. So is
Don't
there
you
a
think we should have
contradiction?
Morley answer that one?
I'm beginning to think so.
Go ahead, Morley.
Yeah, go for it, Morley.
I'm done.
Well, you will know when you will know. They who say they know don't. Those who say they don't, don't. Those who do, do. It's called do-do.
Glenda.
Okay, but let me just say something.
No, wait, Glenda wants to say something.
Oh, okay.
If you think about what Swami Kriyananda said about the writings about him, so in other words, in the past, people knew the future. So isn't that kind of saying that time doesn't exist? Because you can have the past, know the past and the future now. Isn't that what, doesn't that answer the dichotomy? If there is no time, then you would be able to know everything at the same time.
Then you get the predestination, which we're not going to do.
No, but he does say that time ceases when change ceases.
Yeah.
So when we become completely still, time no longer exists. But the second part of your question was, how can it be that in another section it said what?
The past and the future are all with us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But the fact that they're with us doesn't mean that they are our current reality any longer. We're no longer in time.
Well, it's only in that elevated state of oneness that we can say there's no time. So long as there is motion, there is time. So long as there is duality, we experience time as a reality. And now Padma didn't select these particular ones, but there's a very important stanza in Book 4 that points out, and I think it's obvious, so it wasn't necessary to select it, but it basically says the fact that my soul merges with God and is free does not in any way affect the time-space continuum, so to speak. It doesn't change the objective reality of what this person over here, perhaps, who hasn't achieved moksha, is experiencing as their reality. It's a both and. Only in God is there no sense of time. All things exist. But for us, in time and space and motion, it very much exists. So probably the more difficult question is, notwithstanding the ability to see in the future, that's of course very much a puzzle to us, because otherwise we hover towards, our mouse hovers over predestination, which we of course reject out of hand. But perhaps you could say it this way, as I did in a recent conversation with somebody. If we can imagine it, it exists, because thoughts are universally rooted. So everything that's imaginable, past, present, or future, already exists. Doesn't mean it happened to you or whatever, but it's already there.
And it sort of goes back to that other stanza that we covered, where we can become free from that karma, but the fact that it happened doesn't change.
Right.
The fact that we did start that fire and people were killed and their lives were affected doesn't change. That's the past.
What we've dissolved is our participation.
Our ego.
Yeah.
Well, and that's where that point, I think, like Linda was alluding to, for us in that state, there is no past and future. They are the same thing as the now, I guess.
Yeah. There was that one thing I pointed out about sequential, being in the present moment and being present enough with each sequence. It's a mindfulness practice. It's the like Tolle's, whatever it's called, Be Here Now, or whatever it's called. That's somebody
another
else.
guy.
Yeah, that's the other guy. Anyway, but that's a very valid practice. which is to be totally present in this moment, and that's the only thing that exists. It's a wonderful practice. Not easy, but brings a lot of comfort and awakening and prescience. You sort of know a lot of things.
Are there any bhaktis out there that have questions?
The bhaktis have fled. There's a bhakti right there.
Just, it was very interesting in your reflections there at the end, and talking about devotion and service and our meditation practices, and where you're kind of saying that's of the ego, or that's not really getting us anywhere. I mean, it is getting us somewhere. It's directional, but it's just directing us toward letting all of that go. Is that kind
We're
of
practicing.
Yes.
So in our meditation practice, I guess the most important part of it is sort of that stillness at the end. I mean, is that kind of the most important thing?
Yes.
So all of our devotion and service, I mean, yeah.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
it comes from the ego.
Yes, it does. But that's when the ego is our friend, because it's guiding us to the promised land. But it cannot enter the promised land like Moses. It must stay or be dissolved. Because then we enter that, then the soul appears shining, as it were. And that's all that exists. We have to remember that, because I know too many people who they finish their Jyoti Mudra and about 60, 90 seconds later they get up. You know why? It's too hard to be still. It's easy to do Kriya. But be still, that's scary. You don't want to go there. Master said it repeatedly. Swami said it repeatedly. And it's the hardest thing in the path of meditation. The hardest part.
Because that's kind of more of the ego transcendence part of that.
We don't want to let go of the ego.
And our service, let's take that as another example. When it is really nishkam karma, when it is truly action without desire for the fruits of our action, we do experience the blessing of it. We do get that inner expansion from it. But, those are rare moments that we truly are that. But we practice it.
We have to do something.
In order to experience it more and more perfectly.
Yeah.
Another bhakti.
Isn't it the vehicle to experience, the vehicle of our devotion and our offering of our service is the vehicle that we can move into experiencing the grace. Because if we don't have that energy and put it out, we can't receive it. But then we take it into meditation and we say, this is yours, God, and we give it back.
We've said repeatedly in this course alone that virtue is not enough. Good works are not enough. But, as Krishna says, we can't get there by not acting. We have to go through our karma. We have to work out our dharma. We have to serve. We have to be self-giving. We have to develop devotion. But it's all towards the goal. And the goal is beyond all triguna rahitam. Those are all the gunas. All of those things. But we can't turn our backs on it and pretend like we're free. We have to do it. That's the paradox of the spiritual path. There's no getting around that.
Joanne?
The 419, when it talks about the mind is not self-luminous or this perceptible.
Oh God, I was hoping nobody would notice.
So to me that was saying, so the only way you can be emanating luminous energy is if you're just basically channeling like divine energy. And so is that also like the only time you can really send healing energy?
Can you repeat that question?
I think so. Let me see. This is talking about 419 where it says the mind is not itself luminous. Then where did you go with it, Joanne? So the question was, does that mean that we would channel, it would mean that we need to channel divine energy, and when we are such a channel, that we could send out healing energy? So it's effectively a question about...
Well, it says here, the knowledge that we exist comes to us from within, but awareness that we think is perceivable to others. Therefore, the thinking mind is not self-luminous. So once it goes into the mind, once it goes into thought from simply knowing, that's when it becomes, we're drawing thoughts. Thoughts are universally rooted, Master said. So we are magnetizing from outside of ourselves thought form. And that true knowledge comes from within. That's how I read it. Does that make sense to you? From the highest self, from the stillness, from the divine within. Yeah.
He definitely does not.
No, he doesn't. You're right.
Not Masha. Oh, okay. Well, we're kind of late, but is it quick? Because we should wrap it up.
It can be.
Okay.
Speaking of the idea of service and devotion and so forth, and the fact that Patanjali doesn't talk about that, it seems that this scripture, as you said at the beginning, is more of a codifying of knowledge and experience. It's not really, it's not a how-to. He's just saying, this is what happens. And the how-to, Kriyananda can explain the how-to, but it seems like Patanjali that wasn't his goal. He was just saying, he was describing the states and what happens.
Let's talk about the inner practice, whereas the Gita talks about more of the how-to, the life, all the different aspects of our temperament and, how we can transcend the ego. Pardon? Some, yeah.
It's not in detail. It's like Patanjali was giving an outline and really, wanted to.
Well, and how to more in the sadhana level of things, not, yeah.
Okay, I think we better close it up. We did our announcements, eh?
We
Okay.
did. So next week, there's no reading homework, but there is. I want you all to sit in very deep meditation and come up with some very fun things that we can share at Christmas time so that we can have some creative time together.
I'm thinking a Patanjali skit. Somebody's got to come up with a Patanjali skit with some self-luminous something or others, and we can have a lot of fun with this guy. He's tortured us for weeks.
Somebody can pretend to be Murli and read the Sanskrit and...
Yeah, more like butcher it. Thank you, Morley, for being a good sport.
Thank you. Yeah, beautiful.
I didn't understand a word of that.
Yeah. Mr. Dishay, that was so...
Okay, Om
Okay.
Guru, everyone. Thank you.